Welcome, mystery lovers. In this story, we step into the world of Tommy and Tuppence, a pair whose wit and courage have made them unforgettable. Tell us where in the world you're listening from. It's always a joy to see how far these mysteries travel. If you enjoy these mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps keep new cases coming. Now then, shall we begin? London, 1920. The city was still catching its breath after the war, a little battered, a little wiser, but not quite ready to give up on adventure. Buses rumbled along Piccadilly, their red paint dulled by soot. Men in bowler hats walked with brisk purpose, and women, liberated by circumstance and hemlines, moved with new confidence through the fog. Above the hum and clang of a world remaking itself, on the top floor of a narrow building on Dover Street, two young people were plotting how to make life interesting again. The office was small but ambitious. A single desk stood in the middle, its surface a battlefield of notepaper, pencils, and an obstinate telephone that refused to ring. The window looked out onto rooftops where pigeons strutted like rent collectors, and freshly painted on the frosted glass door in neat black letters were the words, "Young Adventurers Ltd, willing to do anything, go anywhere." Prudence. Tuppence Cowley surveyed the sign from behind her desk and decided it looked optimistic. "It's funny," she said, tapping her pencil against the blotter, "how a little paint can make poverty look professional." Tommy Beresford, perched on the windowsill with his hands in his pockets, grinned. "We've got an office, haven't we? That's civilization. All we need now is something to do." "Or someone to pay us to do it," said Tuppence. She leaned back, watching the weak autumn sunlight glint off her typewriter. "Do you think the word adventurers might scare off the timid?" "Not if they're rich and bored," Tommy replied. "The rich are always looking for people to do things they wouldn't dare do themselves." "Then let's hope the rich read small advertisements." He laughed, a sound that still had boyish echoes of trench jokes and near misses. "We've survived a war. Surely we can survive unemployment." "That depends," she said, "on whether adventure is more profitable than heroism." There was a pause then, the kind that hovers comfortably between friends who have known fear and laughter in equal measure. The little office smelled faintly of varnish and optimism. Somewhere below, a milk cart clattered, and the city kept moving toward its next mistake. The door opened suddenly. A gust of cold air came with it, along with a man who seemed too well pressed for Dover Street. He was tall, elegant, his overcoat perfectly fitted, and his gloves the sort that never touched anything unworthy. A faint scent of cologne followed him like a signature. "Good morning," Tuppence said brightly, standing at once. "Can we—" He cut across her, eyes narrowing as if he were solving a puzzle. "Jane Finn?" The name hung in the air like a match over a gas flame. Tuppence blinked. "I beg your pardon?" The stranger's expression changed in an instant, confusion, then calculation. "Forgive me. I thought— No, you reminded me of someone I once knew." He smiled thinly. "You are Miss—" "Cowley," she said. "Prudence Cowley. And this is my partner, Mr. Beresford." "Beresford, yes," Tommy said cheerfully. "And you are—" "Whittington," he replied, as though the name should open doors by itself. "I happen to notice your sign. You say you are willing to do anything?" Tuppence gestured to the desk as if it were a stage. "Within reason, of course." Whittington smiled again, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I see. How enterprising. Tell me, Miss Cowley, have you ever been to America?" "Not yet," she said lightly. "But I'm very adaptable." His gaze lingered on her, measuring. "Adaptable," he repeated, almost to himself. "Yes, I imagine you are." He drew a wallet from his pocket, slim, expensive, and full of possibilities, and extracted a note. "I might have a proposition for you, something confidential." Tommy stood up from the windowsill. "Then you'll want to deal with both of us, I expect." "I think not," Whittington said without looking at him. "This is a private matter, between Miss Cowley and myself." Tuppence's smile did not waver. "My partner and I share everything. Business principle." There was the faintest tightening at the corner of Whittington's mouth, a man unused to being refused. "Very well," he said after a pause. "It concerns the name I just mentioned, Jane Finn." She tilted her head. "Ah, yes, the woman I apparently resemble." "You have no connection with her?" None whatever. He looked at her for a long moment. Then you will not object to doing nothing at all about it. I'm afraid I don't follow. He placed the banknote on the desk, a crisp £5 note far too generous for confusion. That is for your silence. Forget the name. Do not speak it again, to anyone. Tuppence blinked once, slowly. That's a most unusual offer for such a simple request. Some names, Whittington said softly, are better forgotten. Tommy stepped forward. And yet you seem rather determined to remember them on our behalf. Whittington's eyes flicked toward him, sharp as a knife's reflection. Good day, Mr. Beresford. Miss Cowley, you will, I trust, consider my advice. Carefully. He inclined his head slightly and turned for the door. Tuppence's voice stopped him. Suppose I don't? He hesitated, his hand on the handle. Then I should be very sorry for you, he said quietly, and left. The door closed with the gentlest click, leaving behind a faint tremor in the air, and the smell of money that hadn't been earned. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Tommy gave a low whistle. Tuppence, I don't know what you've stumbled into, but it's the most interesting thing that's happened since Armistice. She stared at the banknote as though it were a map. Jane Finn, she said softly. He was afraid of those two words. Which makes me all the more curious, Tommy said. You think it's real? Real enough to buy silence, she murmured. And that's always expensive. She stood, pacing to the window. Outside, a drizzle had begun, soft as smoke. London blurred into 100 shades of grey, and the sign on their door gleamed faintly in the reflected light. Willing to do anything, go anywhere. Tommy lit a cigarette, blowing a thoughtful stream toward the ceiling. So, what's the plan? Do we forget Jane Finn and live happily ever after? Tuppence turned back, eyes bright. If that's what he wants us to do, then most certainly not. Thought as much, Tommy said, grinning. I always did admire your suicidal sense of curiosity. It's not curiosity, she said. It's business. He laughed, settling back on the edge of the desk. Young Adventurers Limited, the firm that runs toward danger instead of away from it. She smiled faintly. Exactly. And if I'm not mistaken, that name, Jane Finn, will mean something before we're done with it. The rain tapped lightly against the glass like an impatient hand. Somewhere below, a newspaper boy shouted headlines neither of them heard. In the little office on Dover Street, two young adventurers stood on the edge of their first case, unaware that behind a stranger's courteous smile and a crumpled £5 note lay a web of danger reaching further than either could imagine. Tuppence sat back at the desk, smoothed the note with her fingers and said briskly, Well, Tommy, it appears Young Adventurers Limited has its first mystery. And Tommy, watching the fog curl past the window, replied with a grin that held more courage than sense. Good. I was beginning to think peace was going to be dull. The office door rattled faintly in the wind as if agreeing, and somewhere in the city, unseen and unsuspected, the next clue was already waiting. The tea shop on Oxford Street smelled of burnt toast and optimism. Afternoon light slanted through the fogged glass, catching the floating crumbs of 1,000 conversations. Lyons's corner house was crowded with the usual post-war mix. Secretaries, soldiers on half-pay, young women with plans too large for their purses. At one corner table, Tommy Beresford and Prudence Tuppence Cowley were deciding whether their new career would end in riches or ruin, or possibly both. Tuppence stirred her tea with deliberate precision, her expression thoughtful. Well, Tommy, she said finally, we can cross one thing off the list. We've had our first mysterious visitor. All we need now is a murder, a map, and possibly an uncle with a title. Tommy grinned over the rim of his cup. You're forgetting a yacht in the Mediterranean and a villain with a monocle. Still, I'll settle for a second client, preferably one that doesn't pay us to keep quiet. The corner house hummed with chatter, the clink of china blending with the shuffle of waitresses in white aprons. Tuppence leaned closer. That name he used, Jane Finn. You saw his face when I pretended not to know her. He went white as a ghost and then tried to buy me off. People don't hand out £5 notes for nothing, Tommy. True, he admitted. Jane Finn. It does sound familiar. I've heard it somewhere, I swear I have. Maybe during the war. Yes, she said softly. I remember it too. There was gossip about a girl who disappeared after the Lusitania went down. Something about important papers. A secret treaty, wasn't it? Tommy frowned. I thought that was just one of those wild stories that never got confirmed. A girl carrying government documents, spies chasing her, all very cloak and dagger. Exactly, said Tuppence, eyes glinting. And now a perfectly respectable gentleman offers me hush money to forget she exists. That means she's real, and whatever she had then, people are still afraid of now. Tommy leaned back, stretching his long legs under the table. Well, we did want adventure, and it looks as if it's obligingly knocking on our door. Don't be flippant, Tuppence said, though her mouth twitched. There's something dangerous here, I can feel it. But danger, my dear Tommy, is the one thing we can afford. Rent, on the other hand, is another matter. A waitress appeared, refilling their cups. Tuppence waited until she'd gone before continuing. We'll do this properly. Advertise, build the brand. Young Adventurers Looted will take on its first investigation. Tommy raised an eyebrow. Our first case is a missing woman we've never met, with enemies we don't know, and a client who paid us not to find her? That's right, he laughed quietly. Splendid. How do we begin? With an advertisement, she said briskly. We'll announce our services to the world. What exactly do we offer? Discretion, initiative, and adventure. She wrote the words on a napkin, underlining each with a flourish. We'll make it sound irresistible. People with secrets love discretion. People in trouble crave initiative. And everyone, darling Tommy, secretly wants adventure. He peered at the napkin. We'll have to pay for that advertisement somehow. Charge it to experience, she said airily, or the overdraft. They'll both be useful one day. By late afternoon, they'd walked from the tea shop to Fleet Street, where Tuppence spent the last of her carefully hoarded coins on a small announcement in the Daily Mail. The clerk didn't blink at the odd wording. He'd seen worse that week. As they stepped out into the fading daylight, the fog had thickened and the street lamps were just beginning to bloom orange in the mist. Tommy buttoned his coat. So we wait? We wait, Tuppence agreed. But I don't intend to be idle. You remember that fellow Whittington? He gave his address as Bloomsbury. I might just stroll past there tomorrow. Tommy shot her a sideways glance. You mean snoop? I mean research, she corrected. A woman must stay informed. They took a bus back toward Dover Street, the city rolling by in grey and gold, and by the time they reached their little office, the drizzle had turned to steady rain. The sign on the glass door gleamed faintly in the lamplight. Young Adventurers Looted, willing to do anything, go anywhere. Inside, the air was cool and faintly dusty. Tuppence switched on the small lamp, casting a warm pool over the desk. There, she said, dropping her umbrella into the stand. If we're to be investigators, we must look the part. Sit, Mr. Beresford. A detective always looks busier when seated. Tommy obeyed, flicking through the Evening Standard with mock gravity. You realise we've advertised ourselves to half of London's lunatics. By tomorrow we'll have letters from gentlemen who think their cats are foreign agents. Let's be grateful if anyone writes at all, she smiled, crossing to the window. Outside, the lights of Piccadilly shimmered like wet coins. Still, there's something in the air tonight. I feel it. Rain, said Tommy. And adventure, said Tuppence. A rare combination. It was nearly 7 when the postman's knock sounded below. Tommy went down and returned with 2 envelopes. One was plain brown, unmarked. The other bore a tidy government hand, addressed simply to Young Adventurers Looted. Tuppence took the first, turning it over. No return address. Charming. She slit it open carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typewritten, If you value your lives, drop the name Jane Finn. Tommy whistled. Friendly lot, aren't they? Tuppence studied the paper. New ribbon. Good machine. The sort typists in offices use, not criminals in garrets. So either we've annoyed a bureaucrat or someone who wants to seem like one. He was already opening the second envelope. Perhaps this one's an invitation to tea with Scotland Yard. She leaned forward. Well? He handed it over. Not quite, but close. The letter was brief, written on embossed stationery. Mr. and Miss Young Adventurers, your recent advertisement has come to my attention. I should like to speak with you on a matter of national importance. Please call upon me at the enclosed address, 10 Whitehall Court, at 11 tomorrow morning. It was signed simply, Mr. Carter. Tuppence read it twice. "Whitehall Court," she murmured. "That's government territory." "British intelligence," Tommy said. "He must be the real thing. The name fits. Carter's a legend in some circles. If he's calling us, it means Jane Finn isn't just a name from a tea-time rumour." She smiled faintly. "So we're in over our heads already. How delightful." Tommy leaned back, grinning. Looks like young adventurers looted is officially in business. The rain rattled harder against the window, and somewhere below a cab splashed through a puddle, sending up a hiss like escaping steam. Tuppence looked at the two letters side by side, one threatening, one official, and felt a shiver of satisfaction. "This," she said, "is what we were waiting for." Tommy folded both papers neatly, tucking them into his coat pocket. "One warning, one summons. Seems we're popular." "Or hunted," Tuppence said, "but either way, it's a beginning." She crossed to the desk, pulled out her notebook, and scribbled the date across the top page. "The Jane Finn case, file num 1. Beneath it she wrote, "First clients Mr. Whittington, anonymous correspondent and the British government." Tommy laughed softly. "You're really taking this seriously." "Of course," she said. "You never know when we'll need to show the record to posterity." He looked at her fondly, struck again by the brisk certainty in her voice. She had the air of someone who could walk straight into a lion's den and emerge politely dusting off her skirt. "Well, partner," he said finally, offering his hand across the desk, "it appears we're hired." Tuppence shook it firmly. "And heaven help whoever tries to fire us." Outside, the rain eased and the street lamps threw shifting halos against the darkening fog. The city seemed to listen, waiting, and in that quiet office above Dover Street, two young adventurers leaned over their first real clue, unaware that before the week was out, they'd find themselves chasing ghosts, spies, and a name that the world had tried very hard to erase. Fog hung low over Whitehall that morning, the sort of grey that blurred edges and made the familiar look faintly menacing. The buildings loomed like watchful sentinels, and the air smelled of damp stone and bureaucracy. Tommy Beresford and Prudence Tuppence Cowley had never before walked into a government office by appointment, and they did so now with a mixture of curiosity and mischief, both trying not to look like what they were, amateurs on their first real case. A uniformed attendant led them through echoing corridors lined with portraits of men who had taken secrets to their graves. The sound of their footsteps on marble seemed louder than it should. Finally, the attendant opened a heavy door and announced them with the reverence reserved for the curious and the doomed. "Mr. Carter will see you now." Inside, the atmosphere was one of restrained authority. A tall window let in only the palest daylight. The walls were lined with filing cabinets whose locked drawers seemed to hum with the weight of classified history. At the far end of a long table sat a man of about 50, trim, composed, his grey hair brushed with military precision. His gaze was calm but not kind. He did not rise when they entered. "Miss Cowley, Mr. Beresford," he said. "Sit down." Tuppence obeyed promptly. Tommy, taking a cue from the man's tone, decided against his usual cheerfulness. Mr. Carter regarded them both as though deciding which of them would survive the week. "You placed an advertisement," he said, "offering your services as, what was it, adventurers?" "Yes," Tuppence replied briskly, "and we've had quite a response already." "I'm aware," said Mr. Carter. He opened a file before him. "You have come across the name Jane Finn." Tommy straightened. "We didn't come across it so much as it came across us, rather abruptly. A man named Whittington mistook Tuppence for her and offered her £5 to keep quiet. We thought it deserved a second opinion." "That was very wise," said Carter without inflection. He glanced down at the file as though confirming that they existed. "I'll tell you what I can, which is not much, but since you've stumbled onto something better left unstumbled, I might as well make use of you." Tuppence's eyes gleamed. "We like being made use of." Said Carter dryly. "I imagine you do." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Jane Finn. The name is genuine. She was a real person, though few remember her now. In May 1915, the Lusitania was sunk off the Irish coast. Among the passengers was a young woman, an American, who was entrusted at the last moment with papers of extreme importance to His Majesty's government. The man who gave them to her died in the explosion." Good heavens, said Tommy. She survived, Carter continued. At least she was seen alive when the lifeboats reached shore. After that, she vanished. No trace, no body, nothing. And those papers have never been recovered. Tuppence leaned forward. What kind of papers? Carter's eyes flicked toward her. You needn't know that. Let's just say they concern the post-war balance of power. In the wrong hands, they could still cause international upheaval. Tommy gave a low whistle. And someone thinks we've got a lead to her. Carter nodded once. Your Mr. Whittington works for a group of foreign agents, an organization so secret that even we only half believe in it. They call its leader Mr. Brown. The rest are merely shadows. But wherever Jane Finn may be, alive or dead, they are still looking for her. For a moment, the ticking of a small clock filled the silence. Tuppence said quietly, So are you. Precisely. Carter rose and went to a cabinet. From it he drew a slim folder and laid it before them. Inside were two items, a list written in careful type, and a small, torn photograph showing the lower half of a young woman's face, smiling faintly, wearing what looked like a nurse's uniform. The list, Carter said, contains possible aliases, names she may have used since disappearing. The photograph is all we have that's genuine. You'll notice it's incomplete. The upper half was destroyed before we received it. Tuppence studied the photograph. Even half a face seemed to hold a trace of spirit. She looks determined, she said softly. Carter allowed the faintest ghost of a smile. That may explain her survival. Tommy frowned. Why come to us? Surely British intelligence has more experienced people. Experience is a double-edged sword, Carter said. Too many of our people are known quantities. The enemy has ways of recognizing us before we recognize them. You, on the other hand, are entirely unknown. You move in different circles, speak to different people. You might hear what we cannot. So we're bait, said Tuppence. Not entirely, Carter replied, but you will be watched from both sides, and I warn you now, if you begin to succeed, you'll become targets. Tommy's grin appeared, quick and boyish. Nothing new about that. We've been targets since the first time we tried to buy breakfast on credit. Carter ignored him. You will report to me only through written messages addressed to the Ministry of Shipping. Attention, Mr. Carter. No names, no details that might be traced. If you find Jane Finn or any clue to her whereabouts, bring it to me directly. And if we find Mr. Brown first? Asked Tuppence. Carter's expression hardened. If you find him, Miss Cowley, you'll wish you hadn't. He's the kind of man who never dirties his hands, but somehow leaves blood behind wherever he passes. No one has ever seen him clearly, but everyone feels him. A master of disguise, manipulation, control. We believe he has agents in positions of trust, even within this building. The words hung heavy in the stale air. Tuppence's eyes narrowed. Then that means we can't trust anyone but ourselves. Precisely, said Carter. You wanted adventure, Miss Cowley. I hope you have the stomach for the real thing. He closed the folder and slid it toward her. That's all I can give you. Use your judgment, your wits, and perhaps a little luck. But remember, his tone dropped a note lower, you're amateurs, don't become martyrs. The meeting ended with a brisk handshake that conveyed warning more than warmth. Outside, the fog had thickened, turning Whitehall into a ghostly corridor. The bells of Westminster tolled 11, slow and resonant. Tuppence adjusted her gloves, tucking the folder neatly under her arm. Well, she said, that was encouraging. Tommy shoved his hands into his pockets. He makes the average headmaster sound affectionate. Still, we've got our marching orders. And a mystery, Tuppence added. A girl who disappeared, a traitor without a face, and the entire government politely terrified. Terrified enough to hire us, Tommy said cheerfully. You realize what this means. We're practically secret agents, off the books, and very much on our own. She gave him a look that managed to be fond and exasperated at once. Secret agents don't announce themselves on Dover Street letterhead. We'll need to be cleverer than that. He fell into step beside her as they crossed the wet pavement. The lamps gleamed like watchful eyes in the mist. So, what's the next move, boss? Tuppence smiled slightly. We find Jane Finn before his spies do. They paused at the curb while a motor car hissed past, spraying mist over their shoes. In its wake, the world seemed momentarily to hold its breath. Then she said briskly, "Come on, Tommy, let's begin our first official assignment." And somewhere unseen beyond the fog, someone else was already watching them. Morning came bright and deceptively peaceful, with the kind of London sunlight that looked warmer than it felt. Dover Street glistened faintly after the night's drizzle, and the city, restless as always, had already begun its usual orchestra. The cries of newspaper boys, the rumble of carts, the clipped rhythm of boot heels on pavement. In their modest office, young adventurers littered were plotting their next move over a breakfast of coffee, rolls, and ambition. Tuppence, already in her hat and gloves, fastened the last button of her coat with brisk purpose. "If Whittington thought I looked like Jane Finn," she said, "then perhaps someone else might think so too. The only difference between information and opportunity, Tommy, is who's asking." Tommy frowned over the newspaper he wasn't really reading. "You're going to get yourself into trouble, that's what you're going to do. Whittington didn't strike me as the kind of man who forgets faces." "Then it's a good thing I'm wearing a different one today." She gave him a mischievous smile. "Miss Robinson, newly arrived from Leeds, applying for a secretarial position through the Universal Employment Bureau." Tommy looked up. "You've thought this through?" "Obviously." She reached for her handbag. "If there's anything to be found about Whittington's business, the Bureau will know. His sort always pretends to hire through proper channels." He rose, catching his hat. "And what am I to do while you play spy?" "Use that famous intuition of yours. Follow the man if you can find him. We'll meet at 5 o'clock at Lyon's Corner House, the one on Tottenham Court Road." Tommy gave a small salute. "Understood. You infiltrate, I tail. Between us, Scotland Yard will be redundant." Tuppence smiled. "And do keep out of prison this time." "Only if you promise the same." By 10:30, she was walking briskly up Victoria Street, every inch the efficient young woman she had decided to become for the day. The Universal Employment Bureau occupied a narrow office on the second floor, its brass plate discreet, its waiting room prim. The air smelled faintly of lavender polish and disappointment. Behind a polished desk sat a grey-haired woman with spectacles and a mouth like a rule-book. "Name?" she asked without looking up. "Miss Robinson," Tuppence said pleasantly. "I was told you might have something suitable for a shorthand typist." The woman adjusted her glasses, inspecting her as if measuring her against an invisible ledger. "References?" "None that would interest you, I'm afraid," said Tuppence sweetly, "but I type quickly and spell correctly, most of the time." The woman pursed her lips but made a note. "We have several temporary posts. You may be called for an interview this afternoon. Leave your address." As Tuppence reached for the pen, the door opened behind her. A man entered, tall, broad-shouldered, with a tanned face and the easy confidence of someone who never doubted the world would bend his way. His accent when he spoke was pure New York. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm looking for a young lady who might have registered here. Name of Jane Finn. You got any record of her?" Tuppence froze, pen poised above the page. The secretary's tone turned frostier. "We do not, sir, nor would I disclose personal information if we did." The man smiled disarmingly. "Sure, I understand. Only, this lady happens to be my cousin. We lost touch during the war." Tuppence turned then, with just enough polite curiosity to mask the jolt running through her. "Did you say Jane Finn?" The man's eyes flicked toward her, sharp with interest. "Why, yes, miss. You know her?" "Not personally," Tuppence replied, feigning carelessness. "But the name sounds familiar." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Well now, that's a start. My name's Julius P. Hersheimer, and I came all the way from New York to find her. Jane was travelling to England in 1915 when the Lusitania went down. Family thought she drowned, but I heard from a sailor she made it ashore. Since then, nothing. Vanished." Tuppence studied him. Everything about Julius Hersheimer seemed larger than life. His voice, his gestures, his sincerity. Yet behind that easy smile, something restless flickered. He wanted answers, badly. "I wish I could help," she said, playing her part. "But you might try the shipping offices or the Red Cross records." He sighed. "Already done. You wouldn't believe how many doors slam shut when you start asking questions about Jane Finn. Funny thing, the moment I mentioned her name, one gentleman suggested I take the next ship home." Tuppence's pulse quickened. Did he now? "Oh, yes," said Julius lightly, which naturally made me stay. "You see, Miss Robinson, was it? My cousin didn't vanish into thin air. Someone's keeping her out of sight." Before Tuppence could reply, the matronly secretary cleared her throat pointedly. "If you're quite finished, Mr. Hersheimer, perhaps you might conduct your inquiries elsewhere." Julius tipped his hat. "Sure thing, ma'am. Didn't mean to ruffle feathers." He turned to Tuppence again. "Pleasure meeting you, Miss Robinson. If you ever remember where you heard that name, I'm staying at the Savoy. Ask for Julius. And if you're in trouble, call me. I've got money and a certain knack for getting things done." He handed her a card and was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of American tobacco and the unmistakable feeling of a story that had just taken a turn. Tuppence tucked the card into her glove, her mind racing. A cousin, or someone pretending to be one, and an American at that. Yet something about him rang true. She smiled faintly to herself. "A gentleman with the wrong smile," she murmured, quoting a line from one of her favourite novels. "Charming, but not to be trusted." Meanwhile, across town, Tommy Beresford had his own quarry. Whittington's office in Bloomsbury had proved empty, but a nondescript clerk, one who looked too nervous for his profession, had left minutes later, glancing behind him twice. Tommy followed at a careful distance through the drizzle, feeling like a hero in a penny thriller. The man took a cab to Mayfair, stopping before a tall block of flats with elegant balconies and an air of expensive secrecy. A brass nameplate read, "Mrs. Marjorie Vandermeyer." Tommy watched as the clerk disappeared inside. A moment later, a window on the third floor lit up, revealing the faint outline of a woman standing by the curtain. He couldn't make out her face, but the silhouette was unmistakably poised, graceful in a way that belonged to actresses and liars. He lit a cigarette, more for cover than comfort, and waited. After 10 minutes, the clerk emerged again, clutching a brown envelope. He hurried away without noticing Tommy slip after him. When at last Tommy returned to Dover Street, the sun had set, and the street lamps glowed through the mist. Tuppence was already there, her hat slightly askew, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Well?" she demanded. He grinned. "Mrs. Marjorie Vandermeyer, former actress, now living too handsomely for her declared income. Whittington's man paid her a visit. I'd wager she knows something about Jane Finn." Tuppence leaned forward. "Funny. I met a man today who says he's Jane Finn's cousin, Julius Hersheimer, rich, loud, and thoroughly suspicious. Either he's genuine, or he's the cleverest liar in London." Tommy frowned. "Then we're not the only ones searching. Whittington, Vandermeyer, this American, all chasing the same ghost." Tuppence smiled, a spark of excitement in her eyes. "And ghosts, dear Tommy, tend to haunt the living, which means Jane Finn is still very much alive." He looked at her with sudden seriousness. "You realize we're being watched, don't you?" She froze. "What do you mean?" He nodded toward the darkened window. Across the street, a figure lingered under a street lamp, pretending to read a newspaper, though the light was too dim for print. Tuppence's tone was steady, but her gloved hand tightened around the edge of the desk. "Then it seems our adventure has truly begun." "Should we call the police?" Tommy asked quietly. Tuppence shook her head. "Not yet. Let them wonder what we know." She rose, drawing the curtain slowly. "Because whoever they are, Whittington, Mr. Brown, or our charming American friend, they've just made one mistake too many." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "They let us know we're important." Outside, the watcher folded his newspaper and melted into the fog. Inside, the little office glowed with the small, defiant light of two people who had no intention of being frightened. The apartment smelled of lilies and danger. Not the innocent Sunday afternoon kind of lilies one found at church altars, but the heavy, suffocating kind that filled rooms where secrets were too large to breathe. Prudence Cowley, though tonight she was Mary Robinson maid, pressed her palms flat against her borrowed apron and told herself she was, above all things, adaptable. Her new employer, Mrs. Marjorie Vandermeyer, occupied a top-floor flat in Mayfair that was part drawing room, part stage. Velvet curtains the colour of spilled wine hung beside French windows, and a grand mirror reflected both the glitter and decay of the place. Mrs. Vandermeyer herself was beautiful in the exhausted way that expensive women sometimes are. blonde hair coiled high, pearls gleaming like small apologies around her throat. Tuppence had arrived that morning under the pretense of being temporarily placed by an agency, a favour managed by an acquaintance of Julius Hersheimer, whose American boldness had its uses. Mrs. Vandermeyer had looked her up and down and, with a faint, amused smile, declared, "You'll do." Now, at 8 o'clock in the evening, the ladies' dinner guests had gone. The champagne glasses were only half emptied, and the flat had settled into its nocturnal rhythm. The gramophone played a slow dance tune, languid as smoke. Tuppence dusted imaginary crumbs from the mantelpiece, keeping one ear tuned to the drawing-room telephone. Mrs. Vandermeyer's voice floated through from beyond the doorway, smooth, low, but edged with nerves. Yes, I understand. No, not here, it's too risky. Tomorrow at 11. A pause. Of course I'll bring it. You think I'm a fool? And you tell Mr. Brown, that I won't be treated like one of his street agents. I've done my part. Mr. Brown. The name hit the air like the echo of a pistol shot, quiet but final. Tuppence's heart gave one sharp thud. She bent closer to the door, her rag motionless in her hand. Another pause. Then Mrs. Vandermeyer laughed softly. Don't threaten me, Conrad. I'm not afraid of you. It's Mr. Brown I'd rather not cross. The receiver clicked back into place. For a long moment, silence, except for the faint hiss of the gas fire and the far-off tick of a clock. Tuppence straightened quickly and resumed dusting as the lady swept in. Still here, Mary? Yes, madam. You may take the tea tray and go to bed. Mrs. Vandermeyer's eyes lingered on her for a fraction longer than necessary. And keep your ears for work, not for walls. Yes, madam. Tuppence curtsied slightly and escaped with the tray. But in the corridor she allowed herself a small, grim smile. For someone supposedly uninterested in eavesdropping, Mrs. Vandermeyer was remarkably defensive. Later that night, the household slept, or pretended to. From her narrow cot in the maid's room, Tuppence could hear faint movements through the wall, the rustle of papers, the occasional strike of a match. She waited, counted to 100, then slipped silently from bed. Her bare feet made no sound on the carpeted hall as she edged toward the study door. It stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, she saw Mrs. Vandermeyer at her writing desk, a lamp throwing soft gold over her shoulders. The woman was reading a letter. No, not reading, deciphering. Her lips moved soundlessly, tracing something on the paper. Then she reached for a candle and held the sheet above it just long enough for a faint pattern of invisible ink to bloom. Tuppence's pulse hammered. She could only catch fragments, half-formed words glowing faintly before the candle singed the edge. Jane Finn, alive, but not herself. Alive, but not herself. What could that mean? The paper crackled as Mrs. Vandermeyer folded it sharply and slid it into a black lacquer box, locking it with a small key. Then she rose, poured herself a brandy and stood staring into the mirror as though someone stood behind her. Tuppence slipped back down the corridor, heart racing. She returned to her room, grabbed the stub of pencil she kept hidden in her shoe, and scrawled the words on a scrap torn from her handkerchief. When morning came, that same scrap would find its way, folded into the seam of her glove, to a letterbox on the corner of Dover Street, Tommy's letterbox. Across London, at that same hour, Tommy Beresford was discovering that espionage had less in common with adventure novels and more with near misses. He had followed one of Whittington's associates, a sharp-faced man with the gait of a ferret, into Soho, where the gas lamps burned weakly and the smell of fried onions battled with cheap perfume. The trail led to a dingy tavern near Greek Street, the sort of place where nobody asked names. Tommy entered quietly, ordered a pint, and pretended to read the racing results. Two men in the corner were talking in low tones. One of them he recognized, the ferret-faced clerk. The other was bulkier, with a scar across his cheek. They spoke in code, but Tommy's ear caught one unmistakable name. Vandermeyer's getting restless. The scarred man's voice was low and guttural. Then remind her who pays her bills. She knows better than to cross him. Him? Said the other nervously. You mean Mr. Brown? The scarred man's answer was a smile, slow and dangerous. A sudden noise from behind made Tommy turn. Too late. Something sharp jabbed into his ribs. Quiet, a voice hissed. Out the back, nice and calm. He obeyed, calculating furiously. The alley outside was dark, wet, and empty except for the gleam of a knife. "Well," said Tommy lightly, "if this is a robbery, I should warn you that my wallet's more threat than treasure." "You've been asking questions," the man growled, "about the Finn girl." Tommy tensed. "Ah, so she exists then. That's good to know." The man raised the knife a fraction. "You won't live long enough to tell anyone." At that precise moment, something crashed behind them, an empty crate dislodged by a cat or Providence itself. The man turned, swore, and in that instant Tommy kicked the knife from his hand and bolted. He ran, twisting through the maze of back streets, until he reached a main road and vanished into the first cab he saw. By the time he returned to his modest lodgings, soaked and breathless, he found a small envelope slid under his door. Inside was a single line written in Tuppence's neat hand. "Jane Finn alive, but not herself. Trust no one. MV fears Mr. Brown." He exhaled, half in relief, half in dread. "Good girl," he murmured. "But if she's discovered—" He didn't finish the thought. Back in Mayfair, Tuppence went about her morning duties with the efficient invisibility of servants everywhere. Mrs. Vandermeyer was in a foul temper, pacing the drawing-room and snapping at her maid. "Bring my letters. No, not those, the ones from last week. And fetch me a cab. I must be at the Ritz by noon." "Yes, madam." Tuppence hurried to obey, noting as she passed that the black lacquer box still sat on the writing desk. The key, however, was gone. By late afternoon, the house was quiet again. Mrs. Vandermeyer had gone out, leaving behind a faint scent of perfume and something else, fear, perhaps disguised as confidence. Tuppence was polishing silver in the pantry when the older servant, a timid woman named Hannah, came in. She hesitated, wringing her hands. "Miss Mary," she whispered, glancing toward the door, "take my advice and get out while you can." Tuppence straightened. "What do you mean?" Hannah's eyes darted nervously. "You're a nice girl. Too nice for this place. There are things worse than death, miss, and they've been in and out of this flat more than once." Before Tuppence could reply, a key turned in the lock. Mrs. Vandermeyer's laughter floated up from the hall, bright, brittle, and false. Tuppence hid her trembling hands behind her back and whispered, "Then it's too late for that, I'm afraid." The clock in the hallway struck 7, each chime echoing like a countdown. Somewhere beyond those velvet curtains and glittering mirrors, the shadow of Mr. Brown moved closer. The note came early, slid under the door before breakfast, as if the morning itself had decided to ruin Tuppence's peace. The envelope was cheap, smudged, but the handwriting inside was unmistakably Tommy's, hurried, boyish, full of the sort of confidence that made her want to shake him. "Meeting contact tonight. Warehouse, Millbank by the river. Don't follow. Might be a lead on Whittington. TB." That was all. No time, no details, and worst of all, no follow-up. By nightfall, he was gone. It wasn't like Tommy to vanish. He could be late, certainly. He could be careless with money, safety, and occasionally his hat. But not with promises. They had arranged to meet at 8. By 9:30, the tea in her cup had gone cold and her fingers were drumming out the tempo of worry. She had walked to the window 3 times, each time convincing herself he'd stroll up the street with that ridiculous grin and some excuse about fog taxis or an unexpected lead. By 10, her patience had hardened into fear. When the doorbell rang, her heart leapt, only to drop again when she saw Julius Hersheimer's tall frame in the doorway. He removed his hat. "Evening, Miss Tuppence. You look like you've seen a ghost." She tried to smile. "Not yet, but I'm beginning to think I might soon." She handed him the note. "He's missing, Julius. He left this. That was yesterday." Julius scanned it quickly, his brow furrowing. "Millbank, eh? Down by the river. That's a fine neighbourhood for smugglers and corpses." "Then that's where we're going," she said briskly. "Now?" "Now." He gave a low whistle. "You English girls sure have backbone. And you Americans talk too much. Get your coat." The cab they took rattled through the fog as if reluctant to intrude upon the river's secrets. London's night air was heavy with damp and coal smoke. Lamplight blurred into halos. When they reached Millbank, even the driver hesitated. "Sure this is the spot, miss? Nobody comes here after dark." "That's why we will," said Tuppence. She paid him and stepped out. The warehouse loomed beside the river like an abandoned fortress. Its windows were boarded, its brick walls slick with mist. A rusted sign over the door read Duncombe and Sons, shipping agents. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Julius took out a flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. If this is a trap, it's a real good one. Tuppence pushed the door. It creaked open with the groan of old secrets. Inside, the air smelled of rope, oil, and time. Piles of empty crates lined the walls. Somewhere water dripped rhythmically, the sound echoing like a metronome of dread. They searched in silence, their footsteps loud in the cavernous dark. Then Julius's light caught something metallic on the floor. "Hold up." He bent down and picked it up carefully. A cigarette case. Silver. Plain, except for the initials TB engraved in neat script. Tuppence took it with trembling fingers. "It's his. I gave it to him after the armistice." "Then he was here," Julius said quietly. "Question is, where'd he go?" She was about to answer when her eyes caught a darker stain on the concrete floor, small, irregular, but unmistakably blood. She knelt, touching it lightly. It was dry, faintly sticky. "Oh, Tommy." Julius put a hand on her shoulder. "Now don't go imagining the worst, Miss Tuppence. Blood don't always mean dead. Could be he clipped his hand on a nail." She drew a sharp breath, straightening. "Or it could mean they took him." Her tone was iron now, though her voice shook. "We'll search every inch of this place." They did, systematically, for nearly an hour. The warehouse yielded nothing else. No note, no footprints, no sign of struggle beyond the stain on the floor and Tommy's forgotten cigarette case. Outside, the fog pressed close, muffling the sounds of the city. Across the river, Westminster's clock tower glowed faintly, its reflection broken in the slow current. "He was on to something," Tuppence said finally. "Something too dangerous. He wouldn't have come here alone otherwise." Then whoever met him wasn't who he thought. A sound behind them made both whirl. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, not bothering to hide. Out of the mist emerged a man of medium height, dressed in black. He carried himself with quiet authority, and his face, pale under the street lamp, was framed by a clerical collar. "Good evening," he said in a mild, pleasant tone. "You seem troubled." Julius stepped slightly in front of Tuppence. "Who are you, friend?" "My name is Mr. Peel," said the stranger. "I work with certain, let us say, ecclesiastical charities along the river. It's not common to find visitors here after dark." "Then we've something in common," Tuppence said sharply. "We're looking for a man." "Ah." Peel's gaze moved to the open door behind them, then to the cigarette case in her hand. "Your companion?" "Yes. He was last seen here." Peel's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. There are unsavory people who use these warehouses for their affairs. Perhaps he stumbled upon one of them." "Perhaps," Julius said slowly, not lowering his guard. "You seem mighty well informed for a man of the cloth." The corners of Peel's mouth lifted faintly. "I make it my business to know what dangers threaten my parishioners." "And what parish is that?" "Wherever there are lost souls," said Peel. His tone was light, but his eyes, dark and watchful, did not match the smile. "If your friend was taken, I may be able to help, but I'll need to know more." Tuppence studied him. His voice was calm, his manner courteous, but there was something about the stillness in him that made her uneasy. "You seem very interested in a man you've never met." Peel inclined his head. "Let us say I dislike needless suffering." "Then perhaps you can tell us who might make people disappear near Millbank," she said. "Because someone did." Peel's gaze flicked briefly toward the river. "There are forces at work in this city, miss." "Robinson," she supplied quickly. "Miss Robinson," he said, "forces older and more efficient than you might imagine. I would advise you, for your own safety, to leave this investigation to those better equipped." "That's the second time I've heard that this week," she replied, "and I didn't listen the first time either." He smiled faintly. "Bravery and folly are siblings. I only hope yours favours the first." He gave a slight bow, turned and melted into the mist as silently as he'd appeared. Julius exhaled. "Well, that was friendly. Either he's the devil in disguise or the best-intentioned priest in England." Tuppence's jaw set. "I don't care what he is. He knows something." "You think he's in on it?" "I think he's watching the same game from another seat, but I intend to find the players." She turned back toward the warehouse one last time, eyes on the bloodstain and the cigarette case now cold in her hand. "If Tommy's alive, I'll find him," she said quietly. "And if he's dead, I'll find who made him so." Julius looked at her, this slight, determined girl with fire in her eyes, and nodded slowly. "Then you'll have help. I'm not quitting till we get answers." The fog thickened around them, the river murmuring in the dark like something half awake. Behind them, the warehouse door swung shut with a hollow thud, sealing the night's secrets inside. They stood a moment longer, two small figures against the immensity of London's gloom. Then Tuppence slipped the cigarette case into her pocket. "Come on," she said. "If Mr. Brown thinks he can frighten me off, he doesn't know me very well." And together they walked away into the mist, unaware that a figure watched from the shadows, his face invisible but his voice, soft, amused, certain, whispering into the cold air. "Let them look. It will make the ending so much more satisfying." The fog lay thick on the Thames that night, a grey curtain that blurred lamps and swallowed sound. The river moved sluggishly beneath, carrying its secrets past moored barges and shuttered boathouses. It was nearly 11 when a small motorboat nosed out from a landing near Chelsea Reach, its engine muttering softly. At the tiller sat Julius Hersheimer, his hat pulled low, while beside him Tuppence hunched under a borrowed cloak, her sharp eyes fixed on the shifting darkness ahead. "Are you certain this is the right place?" Julius asked, his American drawl subdued by the night. "As certain as I can be without divine revelation," she replied. "The code in Mrs. Vandermeyer's letter mentioned delivery twice weekly, South Fleet Wharf. The man at the boat hire said there's only one house downstream that still takes deliveries. That must be it." "Seems mighty risky for groceries." "Or very safe for prisoners," she murmured. The boat drifted around a bend. Through the fog appeared a darker shape, a long, low house crouched close to the riverbank, its windows shuttered, a single lamp burning faintly behind curtains. The water lapped against the mooring posts with a sound like laboured breathing. Tuppence whispered, "Cut the engine." Julius obeyed. The boat coasted silently, bumping gently against the wooden dock. They tied up and climbed out, their feet making no sound on the damp boards. Somewhere a dog barked, distant and forlorn. Tuppence studied the house. "We'll go round to the back. If Tommy's here, they won't be keeping him in the drawing-room." "Miss Tuppence," Julius said softly, "you ever notice you don't scare easy?" "I've no time for that luxury." They crept through reeds slick with mist, the night air sharp with the smell of mud and riverweed. At the rear of the house, a narrow path led to a low door beside what had once been a boathouse. Tuppence tested the handle. Locked, of course, but a small window above it stood open a few inches. Julius grinned faintly. "You first?" "Obviously." She climbed, light as a cat, and slipped through, landing in a small storeroom that smelled of rope and varnish. Julius followed, less elegantly, nearly knocking over a stack of oars. "Shh," Tuppence hissed. From beyond the next door came muffled voices. Two men, one speaking in a London drawl, the other foreign, clipped, impatient. "Orders was clear," the first voice said. "Keep him quiet till Brown sends word." "And if he doesn't?" the other asked. "Then we keep him quiet for good." A match flared. Through a crack in the door, Tuppence saw the glow light up their faces, rough, unshaven, and utterly disinterested in mercy. She touched Julius's sleeve and mouthed, "Two of them." He nodded grimly. In a far corner of the storeroom stood a row of shelves cluttered with cleaning bottles. Tuppence scanned them quickly, her eyes landing on one labelled chloroform, for medical use. She smiled faintly. Bless Mrs. Vandermeyer's vanity. Her perfumes may yet do us a favour. Within minutes she'd soaked 2 rags with the stuff. Then, timing it with the sound of one man yawning, she pushed the door open slightly and tossed one bottle across the room. It clattered loudly, rolling beneath a bench. "What the—" Both men turned. Tuppence darted forward like lightning, pressing the soaked rag over the nearer man's mouth. Julius lunged at the second, knocking him flat with one well-placed punch. The fight was brief, clumsy, and silent. A minute later, both men lay unconscious on the floor. Julius wiped his hands. "Remind me never to cross you, Miss Tuppence." She caught her breath, eyes darting to the next door. "Save your admiration for later. We've only borrowed a few minutes." They crept onward through a dim hallway. A lamp burned low, casting long shadows across the bare walls. The air was heavy, the kind of quiet that listens. Then, faintly, came a sound that stopped them both. A cough, followed by a hoarse voice muttering to itself. Tuppence ran toward it, Julius close behind. She threw open a door and froze. Tommy sat slumped against a chair, his hands tied, his face pale beneath bruises. He blinked as the light hit him. "Tuppence!" She was beside him in an instant, tearing at the ropes. "Oh, thank heaven! Tommy, you idiot! Why didn't you wait for me?" He gave a weak grin. "Thought I'd surprise you with results. It didn't go quite to plan." "No," she said sharply, though her voice trembled. "You've made a spectacle of yourself instead." Julius stepped forward, slicing through the last of the bindings with his penknife. "Easy there, buddy. Let's get you out before the welcoming committee wakes up." Tommy staggered as they lifted him. "There's a guard outside," he warned hoarsely. "Tall chap with a revolver. Calls himself Conrad." Tuppence's eyes flashed. "He's sleeping off a dose of chloroform. For once, your timing's perfect." They half led, half carried him toward the back door. But just as Julius reached for the latch, voices erupted from the front of the house. Shouts, hurried footsteps. "They've found the others," Tuppence whispered. "Go." They burst into the night air, stumbling across the muddy yard toward the river. A gunshot cracked behind them, the bullet whistling past Tuppence's ear. "Keep low," Julius shouted. Another shot rang out, splintering wood near her feet. The mist became their ally, swallowing them as they raced for the dock. Julius leapt into the boat first, hauling Tommy in after him. Tuppence untied the rope with shaking hands and pushed them off just as two figures appeared on the bank, firing blindly into the fog. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. Julius spun the tiller. The boat veered into the channel, skimming past shadowy barges and glimmering reflections. Behind them, angry voices shouted, fading into distance. Sirens wailed somewhere upriver, police perhaps, or something worse. The fog thickened again, wrapping them in ghostly safety. Tuppence sat beside Tommy, one hand on his arm. "You're sure you're not hit?" "Only my pride," he murmured. "They wanted to know what we'd found out about Jane Finn. I told them nothing." She smiled faintly. "Good, because I'm starting to think Jane Finn is the key to all of it. Mr. Brown, Mrs. Vandermeyer, Whittington, they're all orbiting her like moths around a candle." "Then we'd better make sure she doesn't get burned," Tommy said weakly. Julius slowed the motor as they neared a public dock downstream. "We'll ditch the boat here and get a cab. My hotel's safer than anywhere else right now." They scrambled ashore, wet, shivering, and exhilarated. By the time they reached the Savoy, it was nearly 3 a.m. The staff, accustomed to odd hours and odder guests, asked no questions. In Julius's suite, warmth and electric light replaced the chill of the river. Tommy collapsed into an armchair, wincing. Tuppence busied herself with tea while Julius locked the door. "Now," she said firmly, "tell me everything." Tommy ran a hand through his hair. "Whittington's dead." She gasped. "Dead?" "They said so. He talked too much about Mr. Brown, apparently. And Mrs. Vandermeyer, she's next if she doesn't deliver something, a list, maybe. They kept asking me if I'd seen Jane Finn. When I said no, they laughed and said, 'She's closer than you think.'" Tuppence exchanged a look with Julius. "Alive, then, and nearby?" Julius frowned. "I'd give $1,000 to know where. My cousin, if she's still herself." Tuppence repeated softly, "Alive, but not herself." She shivered, recalling the coded letter's words. Tommy looked up. "What do you mean?" She told him of Mrs. Vandermeyer's secret note, the hidden ink, the phrase that had haunted her ever since. When she finished, the room was silent except for the ticking of the mantel clock. Julius poured a stiff drink and handed it to Tommy. "Well, partner, looks like we've all had a long night. But one thing's certain, Mr. Brown just declared war." Tuppence straightened, her expression hardening. "Then so have we." Outside, dawn crept pale and uncertain over the river. The city yawned and stretched, unaware that its fog still hid 1,000 secrets, and among them, the fate of Jane Finn. The fire burned low in Julius Hersheimer's suite at the Savoy, throwing restless shadows across the polished wood and soft carpets. The city outside was a blur of mist and light, but inside all was still, too still for Tuppence's liking. She sat on the arm of an armchair, hands clasped around a cooling teacup, while Tommy paced the length of the room like a soldier reviewing invisible troops. It had been 3 days since the escape from the house by the river, 3 days of hiding, false names, and watching every shadow twice. And now Julius had summoned them both to the hotel with a note marked urgent. The door opened quietly. Julius entered, his tall frame looking more grave than usual. "I've found someone," he said simply, "and I think you both ought to meet her." He stepped aside and a nurse appeared, plain uniform, cap, steady hands guiding a young woman into the room. The girl was perhaps 20, fair-haired, her face pale against the grey shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her eyes, wide and uncertain, took in the strangers before her, as if they might vanish if she blinked. "This is Miss Jane," the nurse said softly. "She's still very weak." The girl smiled faintly, her accent unmistakably American, though her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I don't quite know why I'm here." Tuppence rose slowly, every nerve taut. "It's quite all right," she said gently. "You're among friends." Julius dismissed the nurse and waited until the door closed. Then he turned to them, his voice unsteady for once. "I found her at a nursing home on the coast, place called Seaview. They said she was brought in from the road 2 months ago. No memory, no papers, nothing but an American locket and a bad case of exhaustion. She kept saying the name Brown in her sleep." Tommy stopped pacing. "Good Lord, you think—" "I don't think," Julius said quietly. "I know. She's my cousin, Jane Finn." The name fell like a thunderclap in the room. Tuppence stared at the girl, this fragile creature with trembling hands and eyes like distant water. Could this really be the woman whose disappearance had set all of London whispering? Jane hesitated, touching the locket at her throat. "They tell me I was found near the cliffs," she murmured. "Sometimes I remember. Bits. Faces, perhaps. A man with kind eyes. Another, frightening." Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. "Can you remember any names?" She shook her head, distressed. Only a voice, saying, "You'll forget," and then darkness. Tuppence knelt beside her chair. "Don't force it. You'll remember when it's safe." Jane looked at her with sudden intensity. "Safe? Why would it not be?" Before Tuppence could answer, the telephone rang sharply, shattering the quiet. Julius crossed the room and picked it up. "Yes?" A pause. Then his face changed. "When?" He turned to them, grim. "Mrs. Vandermeyer's dead." "Dead?" Tuppence repeated, rising. "How?" "Poisoned," he said. "Police found her maid gone and the room locked from the inside. They say she'd been trying to telephone someone before she collapsed." Tommy's jaw tightened. "Then she knew too much. About Mr. Brown." "And someone made sure she never told," Tuppence said. Julius set down the receiver. "There's more. They found a notebook among her things, partly burned, but one page survived. Inspector says it mentions a meeting, something about the traitor among them." Tuppence moved to the window, her mind racing. "A traitor? Among us?" Tommy frowned. "You mean among the government?" "Or among us," she said quietly. There was a heavy silence. The fire popped in the grate. Julius cleared his throat. "You're not suggesting—" "I'm suggesting nothing yet," Tuppence said. "But Mrs. Vandermeyer feared someone close. She told her maid there were eyes everywhere, and if she was telling the truth—" Tommy nodded slowly. "Then Mr. Brown isn't just watching us. He's using one of us." Julius exhaled sharply, pacing toward the hearth. "You think I'd come this far, spend my money, risk my neck just to trap you?" Tuppence's voice softened. "No, Julius. But we've all been fed crumbs from different tables, and someone, somewhere, is sweeping up the rest." Jane stirred faintly, watching them. "Mr. Brown," she whispered, "he always had others do his work. You never saw his face, only felt it." Her voice trembled. "I was carrying something for him, wasn't I? A paper?" Tommy crouched beside her. "Yes, Jane, a treaty. It vanished when you did." Her hand went to her temple. "I remember the ship, the noise, and then water. Someone pulled me out, said I was safe now. But later, I heard them talking. They wanted the papers. I ran. I must have fallen." She broke off, eyes wide with terror. "He said he'd find me again." Tuppence gripped her hand. "He won't. You're with us now." But inside, her thoughts spun in a dozen directions. Vandermeyer dead, a missing maid, a traitor's note, and now Jane Finn, alive but broken, as if the past had been wiped clean. It felt like being handed the missing piece of a puzzle, only to discover the picture had changed. Tommy went to pour drinks, more for nerves than thirst. "One thing's clear," he said, returning. "Whoever killed Vandermeyer did it to stop her naming Brown, which means she was close." "Or she already told someone," Tuppence murmured. "Who?" "That's what we must find out." Julius, still staring into the fire, spoke slowly. "Then we start by finding that maid. She's the only one who might have seen what happened. I'll put my men on it." Tuppence looked at him. "Be careful whom you trust. If Brown has a hand inside the police, or worse, he'll know your every move." He nodded grimly. "I'll be careful." Jane shifted uneasily. "If she died because of me—" "No," said Tuppence firmly. "Because of him. Everything that's happened, or the threats, the attacks, the lies, all lead to Mr. Brown." Tommy leaned against the mantel, thinking. "It's odd, isn't it? Whittington, Vandermeyer, Conrad, all of them afraid of him, but nobody ever meets him. Nobody even knows what he looks like." Tuppence met his eyes. "Which makes him the most dangerous man in London." He smiled faintly, though there was no humour in it. "You're starting to sound like him, you know. Wolfe, Poirot, all those detectives you read about." "Then perhaps it's time I acted like one." She turned to Jane. "You said he had others working for him. Do you remember any names? Anything at all?" Jane's brows knit as she searched her fractured memory. "Only one thing. A word they used. Peel. I thought it was a name. He came sometimes, spoke softly, always wore gloves." Tuppence went still. "Mr. Peel." Tommy's eyes widened. "The man by the river?" Julius frowned. "You know him?" "He found us the night we escaped," Tuppence said slowly. "Claimed to be a priest. Offered help, but he knew too much. I thought—" She stopped. "I thought he was lying. But if he's one of Brown's, then he's watching us right now," Tommy finished. The fire hissed suddenly, a log collapsing into ash. Outside, a car backfired on the embankment, sharp as a gunshot. Julius crossed to the window, peering through the curtain. "Nothing but fog," he said, though his tone was uneasy. "Still, I'll post a guard downstairs." When he was gone, Tuppence turned to Tommy. "Do you think Jane's truly lost her memory?" He looked toward the sofa where Jane had drifted into a fragile sleep, her fair head resting against the cushions. "If she's acting," he said softly, "it's the finest performance I've ever seen." "Or the most dangerous." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "You suspect her?" "I suspect everyone," she said simply, "including myself when I'm tired enough." He smiled faintly. "That's the Tuppence I know. Cynical, reckless, and always right." She gave a small, tired laugh. "I'd settle for half of that tonight." Julius returned, locking the door behind him. "Done. No one gets in or out." "Then we rest," Tuppence said. "Tomorrow we start again. Mr. Brown won't stop, not now that Jane's found, but neither will we." For a while none of them spoke. The only sound was the clock ticking toward midnight. The fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. Tommy sat down heavily, staring into the fire. "You know," he said after a moment, "it's strange. Every time we think we're closing in, the picture changes, like someone rearranging the pieces while we aren't looking." Tuppence looked into the flames, her voice low. "That's because Mr. Brown's been holding the picture all along." Her words hung in the silence, and outside the city slept uneasily, its streets cloaked in secrets, and one name whispered by the wind, soft as fear itself. The countryside rolled away in muted golds and browns, mist curling low over the fields as the motorcar turned onto the narrow drive. The sign at the gate was freshly painted, Astley Priors, a convalescent and rehabilitation home, and the stone pillars bore discreet new lamps. To the casual passer-by, it was an institution for the weary and the wounded. To Tommy and Tuppence Beresford, it was something else entirely. They had followed the trail from Mrs. Vandermeyer's half-burned diary to a letter found among her effects, a letter referencing Operation Phoenix and a meeting at the Priors. Every clue since had pointed here. And now, after a day's preparation and a forged letter of introduction from Julius's contacts, They arrived as new staff, Tommy as an orderly and Tuppence as a nurse's aide. The gravel crunched beneath their shoes as they approached the tall oak doors. Behind them the wind sighed through the trees, a sound like distant whispers. Tuppence adjusted her cap and murmured, "You do realize if they recognize us, this may be the shortest employment in history." Tommy, buttoning his jacket, gave her a wry smile. "Nonsense. I'm told I have a reassuring bedside manner." "Only when you're asleep." The door opened before she could add more. A man in a white coat stood framed in the hall's dim light, tall, lean, with a face that looked carved rather than born. His dark eyes flicked over their papers. "You're from the London Registry?" he asked. "Yes, sir," said Tuppence evenly. "Miss Robinson and Mr. Beresford." He hesitated just long enough for her to feel it. Then he handed back their documents and stepped aside. "We'll see if you're as competent as they claim. Follow me." They were led through a corridor that smelled faintly of antiseptic and polished wood. The walls were hung with landscape paintings, but beneath the pastoral calm, something felt wrong. It was too quiet, the kind of quiet that listened back. At last, the man stopped. "You'll report to Matron Driscoll in the West Wing. We keep early hours here. The patients are not to be disturbed unnecessarily. And one more thing." "Yes?" "If you value your positions," he said softly, "you'll mind your own affairs." He turned on his heel and vanished down the hall. Tommy exhaled. Charming fellow. "Terrifying," Tuppence murmured. "Did you notice his ring? Gold crest, the same emblem as the one on Vandermeer's stationery." "I noticed. And the way he called us staff with the same tone one uses for dust. This is our man, all right." They found Matron Driscoll in a small office that looked out over the gardens. She was stout, middle-aged, and possessed the kind of efficiency that brooked no disobedience. "You'll find your quarters upstairs," she said briskly. "Breakfast at 6, duties begin at 7. We run a quiet establishment. Some of our patients are of delicate nerves. You will not gossip or ask questions." "Of course, matron," said Tuppence demurely. When they were dismissed, Tommy closed the door behind them and whispered, "That woman could terrify the German army." "She's not our problem," Tuppence replied. "We need to find where they hold their meetings, and why a supposed home for invalids needs armed guards at the gate." That evening, after the patients had retired, Tuppence wandered the corridors under the pretence of checking rooms. Lamps burned low, and the only sound was the soft shuffle of slippers from the wards. Yet every time she turned a corner, she felt eyes on her. Near the stairwell, she paused. 2 men were speaking in the shadow of a doorway. "No word from Mr. Brown yet," said one. "He'll send it when the plan's ready." "The list is nearly complete," the other replied. "By the end of the week, Phoenix rises." Tuppence caught her breath. The floorboard beneath her foot creaked. Instantly the voices stopped. She stepped forward, coughing lightly as though startled. "I beg your pardon. I didn't realize anyone was here." The men turned. One was the dark-eyed doctor who'd met them earlier. The other was a heavy-set orderly with a scar along his jaw. "Lost Miss Robinson?" the doctor asked pleasantly. "No, sir. Merely looking for the linen cupboard." He smiled thinly. "Then you'd best find it quickly." Tuppence inclined her head and hurried off. Only when she was sure she wasn't being followed did she slip into the nearest side passage, her mind racing. Phoenix rises. What could it mean? She found Tommy later in the service corridor, stacking trays near the kitchen. "I think we've struck gold," she whispered, recounting the exchange. He listened, frowning. "Then the doctor, whatever his name is, must be one of Brown's men. We need proof." "And we'll get it tonight," she said. "I saw a locked door behind his office. If this is where their correspondence goes, it'll be there." "You mean to break in?" "Of course." "Why do I even ask?" The household slept by midnight. Wind rattled the windows and sent the trees outside into slow, uneasy motion. In the dark corridor, Tuppence's lamp threw a narrow beam ahead as they crept toward the doctor's office. The key was gone, but the lock proved no match for Tommy's stolen hairpin. Inside, the air was cool and faintly metallic. Papers lay neatly stacked on the desk. A map of Europe hung on the wall, dotted with small red pins. Tuppence moved quickly, rifling through drawers. Letters, ledgers, nothing useful yet. Wait. She pulled out a file marked Operation Phoenix. The pages were filled with typed notes and code numbers. At the top of one sheet was a phrase that made her blood run cold. List of operatives for reorganization after Brown's ascension. Ascension? Tommy muttered. Good Lord, they're talking about a takeover. Before they could read further, a sound broke the silence. Footsteps in the corridor. They froze. The handle turned. Tommy lunged for the lamp, dousing it, plunging the room into darkness. The door opened. A figure entered carrying a small torch. Its beam swept the room once, then lingered on the desk. Tuppence's breath caught. It was the doctor. He moved closer, muttering to himself. They'll not ruin it now. Not when we're so close. Tommy waited until he turned his back, then seized Tuppence's hand. They slipped through the side door leading to a narrow staircase. The steps descended into darkness. At the bottom, the air grew damp, cold. A cellar. Rows of crates lined the walls, and among them a table covered in envelopes stamped with foreign seals. Tuppence ran her fingers over one. Courier drops, she whispered. Every letter probably bound for Brown's network. Tommy picked up another, unsealed, and scanned it. Here's one addressed to PP, same initials as that Mr. Peel character, so he's still in the game. Before they could examine more, the lights above flickered, then went out completely. The house plunged into blackness. Somewhere upstairs a bell clanged, followed by hurried voices. What happened? Tuppence gasped. Power failure, Tommy said grimly. Or someone cut it. Then came the scream, faint, distant, unmistakably female. Tuppence spun toward the stairs. The guest wing! They stumbled upward, the cellar door slamming shut behind them. She found a patient's room empty, the window open, the curtains flapping in the wind. They've taken someone, she whispered. Tommy appeared behind her, breathless. We have to search the grounds. They split up. The storm outside had risen to a steady drizzle, and the garden paths gleamed under the flickering glow of lanterns. Tuppence followed the sound of footsteps around the west side of the house, her shoes sinking into wet grass. Someone was ahead, a man, moving fast. She caught the glint of light on metal, a lantern swinging wildly. Stop, she called. He turned sharply, and for a moment their lights crossed. His beard caught the light, rough and dark, but his eyes, her breath caught, those eyes, she'd seen them before. He bolted toward the gate. Tuppence ran after him, mud splashing beneath her feet. She caught his sleeve, pulling hard. The lantern slipped from his hand, clattering to the ground. Its flame flickered up, lighting his face, and the illusion fell apart. The beard was false, held by wire and gum. Beneath it was a face she knew, a face that froze her where she stood. You? Peel, she whispered. He stared at her, eyes narrowing. You shouldn't have come here, Miss Cowley. Then he struck the lantern with his boot, plunging them both into darkness. Tuppence! Tommy's voice rang out from across the garden. But by the time he reached her, she was standing alone, the gate swinging gently in the wind. The beard lay trampled in the grass, and beyond it the night swallowed the man who had worn it. The man she now knew had been playing both sides from the beginning. Tuppence's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. I saw his face, Tommy, and it wasn't a stranger's. The rain fell harder, erasing footprints, but nothing could wash away what she'd seen, the truth beginning at last to take shape. The rain had not stopped since dusk, a steady grey torrent that turned the roads to ribbons of mud and made every tree seem to lean closer in conspiracy. Inside the sitting room of the little inn at Astley Village, the fire struggled against the damp. Tuppence stood by the window, staring into the storm, her reflection pale and intent in the glass. Tommy came up behind her. You haven't moved in half an hour, he said softly. I'm thinking, she murmured. Dangerous habit, she smiled faintly. Not as dangerous as trusting the wrong man. I saw his face, Tommy. The beard was false. It was Mr. Peel. Tommy exhaled. Our friendly neighbourhood clergyman. Exactly. The man who offered help, who always seemed to know just enough, and never quite enough. I should have known. Julius Hersheimer, sitting on the arm of a chair, frowned. Then he's the one behind it all. Brown himself? Tuppence nodded slowly. It fits too neatly. Every clue that reached us came through him or his contacts. Even Jane's recovery. Too convenient, too timely. Tommy rubbed his chin. And if Peel is Brown, he has the treaty, which means tonight decides everything. Julius straightened. Then we're not waiting till morning. We go back to Astley Priors, find that cellar and finish it. Tuppence looked out again at the rain. He won't expect us so soon. That's our only advantage." By midnight, the storm had worsened. The grounds of Astley Priors were a sodden labyrinth of shadows. They left the car a quarter-mile down the lane and approached on foot, their coats clinging wetly to their shoulders. The great house loomed ahead, its windows dark, the facade streaked with water. The air smelled of wet earth and cold iron. Julius whispered, "How do we get in?" Tommy gestured toward the side terrace. "Servant's door. I remember the way." They crept along the wall, every gust of wind covering their footsteps. The door gave under Tommy's pressure with a reluctant groan. Inside, the silence was so thick it seemed to muffle even the storm. Tuppence took a candle from a sconce and lit it. The tiny flame trembled, throwing gold against the damp stone. "Basement first," she said. "If he's here, that's where he'll be." They descended the narrow staircase, the air growing colder with each step. Somewhere below, water dripped steadily. The cellar stretched ahead, rows of crates, stacks of boxes, the same table where she and Tommy had found the coded letters before. But now the table was clear except for a single lamp burning low. Tommy moved toward it cautiously. "No one here." "Don't be too sure," Tuppence whispered. A voice came from the shadows. "Quite right, Miss Cowley. Never be sure of anything." The candle flickered wildly. From behind a column stepped Mr. Peel, his clerical collar gone, his dark hair slicked back, eyes gleaming like polished glass. Tuppence's heart gave a single hard beat. "So it's true." He smiled, calm and precise. "You've always been quick, Miss Cowley. It's what made you useful. A pity you had to spoil it." Tommy stepped forward. "You're Mr. Brown." Peel inclined his head slightly. "Names are tedious things, Mr. Beresford. Let's say I've worn several. Brown, Peel, perhaps others you've met without realizing." Julius's fists clenched. "You used us. You let us lead you straight to Jane Finn." "Correction," Peel said smoothly. "I guided you. A clever pair of amateurs with enthusiasm and a rich fool eager to bankroll them. It was charming, really, like watching children with fireworks." "Children who nearly ruined your plans," Tuppence said. "On the contrary," he replied, "you delivered precisely what I needed. The missing treaty, retrieved, decoded, and nearly placed into my hands. Until that tiresome woman, Mrs. Vandermeyer, lost her nerve, I had to tidy that up." Tuppence felt her throat tighten. "You killed her." "She was a liability," Peel said simply, "and liabilities in my line of work are bad for business." His tone was light, conversational, as though discussing weather. That calm terrified more than rage ever could. Tommy's voice was low. "You'll never leave this house." Peel's eyes gleamed. "Won't I? My men are gone. My plans are burned. All that remains is to ensure silence. You see, I've always preferred clean endings." He raised a revolver. The sound of the rain outside filled the pause like a heartbeat. Tuppence met his gaze, steady. "You've planned every move, haven't you? Every double cross, every murder. But tell me, when you look in the mirror, who do you see now? Peel? Brown? Or just another man afraid of being ordinary?" For the first time, his composure faltered. "You think this was about fear?" "I think it always is." His smile returned, brittle now. "You really are remarkable. Almost a pity." The gun moved toward her. Tommy tensed, ready to lunge, but Tuppence's voice cut across the room. "Do you know what I remember best, Mr. Peel? The spy games Tommy and I played as children." He blinked, momentarily thrown. "Signals with mirrors, invisible chalk marks, secret codes. Do you recall the simplest rule of all?" She stepped slightly to her left, keeping his attention. "Never corner your opponent unless you've checked the exits first." He frowned. "What are you—" In that instant, Julius moved behind a stack of crates, seized the heavy lamp and hurled it. The room exploded in light and smoke as it shattered, the flame flaring against the damp floor. Peel fired. The bullet struck wood inches from Tommy's head. Tuppence flung herself sideways, grabbing a length of canvas and throwing it over the gunman's arm. The shot went wild. Tommy lunged, tackling him hard. The revolver clattered away. They struggled across the floor. Peel was stronger, more desperate. He struck Tommy across the jaw, sending him sprawling. Tuppence caught the edge of a crate to steady herself and saw something glint near her hand. A tin canister, still half full of chloroform, a remnant from the earlier supplies. Peel advanced toward her, breath ragged. "This ends now." She held the canister loosely, her voice calm. "Yes, it does." He laughed. "Do you plan to hit me with that?" "No," she said quietly. "I plan to play the game." She flung the canister at the lantern flame. It burst with a hiss, a sharp white cloud filling the air. Peel coughed, staggered, and went down on one knee. Tommy, dazed but conscious, grabbed his collar and slammed him against the wall. "That's for Tuppence," he growled. Footsteps thundered above. Voices shouted, then the crash of doors bursting open. Peel laughed hoarsely. "Too late. You think your police will stop me? They don't even know who to arrest." Tuppence picked up the revolver and aimed it at him. "We do." He straightened suddenly, eyes wild. "You'll never understand what power is," he said. "I could have ruled half of Europe from the shadows. And you were clever, but not clever enough." Tommy said quietly, "Then that makes us human, doesn't it?" Peel smiled, a strange, almost peaceful expression. "Human," he echoed. Then, before either could move, he turned the gun in his own hand. The shot rang out, echoing through the cellar and up the stairwell. When the police burst in moments later, led by Mr. Carter himself, they found him slumped against the wall, eyes open, a faint smile frozen on his lips. The revolver lay beside him. Tuppence lowered her weapon slowly. "He chose his ending," she whispered. Mr. Carter surveyed the scene grimly. Most of his kind do. Brown was never meant to face a jury. Tommy rubbed his bruised jaw. "Then it's really over." Carter nodded. "Thanks to you two, and a good deal of luck." Julius, wiping soot from his sleeve, exhaled. "Luck, sure, but mostly her." He nodded toward Tuppence. She played him like a fiddle. Tuppence gave a weary smile. Just an old childhood trick. Never lost its charm. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The first light crept over the estate, painting the fields silver and green. In the drawing room, the three of them sat with steaming cups of coffee while the police moved quietly through the halls. Jane Finn, pale but awake now, sat near the window. "So, it's finished?" she asked softly. Tuppence nodded. "Mr. Brown is dead. His network will crumble. You're safe now, Jane." Jane's eyes filled. "I can't ever thank you enough." "Thank Julius," Tuppence said gently. "He never stopped looking." Julius flushed. "Guess family counts for something after all." Tommy leaned back, stretching stiffly. "So, Miss Cowley, what's next for our illustrious agency?" "Rest," she said. "Tea, and possibly a very long nap." He grinned. "No more spies." "Not until someone else loses a treaty," she said, though her smile softened. Outside, the sun broke through the last of the storm clouds. The shadows that had haunted them for weeks seemed to lift with it. Tommy rose and looked toward the horizon. "Strange thing, adventure," he said quietly. "You never quite notice when you've survived it." Tuppence joined him at the window. "Perhaps that's the point. You only realize it when you're home again." He looked at her, eyes bright. "And where exactly is that?" She smiled. "Wherever we happen to be, together." The clock on the mantel struck 8. In the quiet that followed, the three of them stood still. The sound of rain now only a memory. The chapter of Mr. Brown closed forever. The morning after the storm broke clean and bright, as though London itself were exhaling after a long, terrible dream. The air outside the Foreign Office was sharp with early sunlight, the kind that turned every brass knocker and every raindrop into something momentarily golden. Inside, the atmosphere was altogether less dazzling, formal, polished, and faintly disapproving. Tuppence sat very straight in a leather chair, hands folded neatly in her lap, while Tommy, beside her, did his best impression of looking respectable. Across from them, at a wide mahogany desk, Mr. Carter of British Intelligence studied the recovered suitcase as though it were a coiled serpent. "So," he said at last, his voice precise, "this was the famous luggage Miss Finn carried aboard the Lusitania?" "Yes, sir," Tuppence replied. "The very one. Hidden under a false bottom. We found the compartment only this morning, when Julius insisted on inspecting every stitch of her belongings before the voyage." Julius, lounging by the window, grinned. "Can't take chances, sir. My motto's trust no trunk, especially if it's been in enemy hands." Mr. Carter's thin lips twitched, the closest thing he ever came to amusement. He withdrew a sheaf of slightly water-stained papers from the secret compartment, spreading them on the desk. Each bore the unmistakable imprint of state seals and signatures. "The treaty," he said quietly, "intact. Do you have any notion what chaos would have followed had this reached foreign hands?" Tommy leaned forward. "A rough idea, yes. We were nearly part of that chaos ourselves." Mr. Carter glanced up. "You've caused me more grey hairs than most of my agents manage in a decade. You disobeyed warnings, impersonated servants, and broke into a government-sanctioned facility." Tuppence met his gaze evenly. "And found your treaty." There was a beat of silence. Then he inclined his head. "Quite," she smiled. "Then we're forgiven?" "You're thanked," he corrected, "which is not the same thing." He rose and locked the papers in a drawer. "And, Miss Cowley, Mr. Beresford, consider this your official and permanent retirement from espionage." Tommy coughed. "We were never officially employed." "Then consider yourselves officially unemployed," Carter said dryly. "You're both fortunate Mr. Peel's demise spared you an inquest." Tuppence shivered slightly. "He'd rather have died than stand trial. I almost pity him." Carter's expression softened. "Don't. Mr. Brown's legacy will take years to unravel. Men like him never work alone." Julius turned from the window. "You mean there are others?" "There always are," Carter said. "But that's for the service to worry about now. As for you, Mr. Hersheimer—" "Yes, sir." "You've done His Majesty's government an unintentional favour. I suggest you return to your native shores before England decides to draft you into service." Julius chuckled. "Fair enough. America's got its own headaches. But I won't leave till Jane's ready." At the mention of her name, all eyes turned toward the doorway. Jane Finn entered quietly, escorted by a nurse, her step still tentative but no longer trembling. Sunlight caught the pale gold of her hair and the delicate curve of her face. She smiled as she saw them all. "I'm not late, am I?" "Not at all," Tuppence said warmly, standing to guide her forward. "We were just discussing your imminent return to normal life." "Normal," Jane repeated softly. "I'm not sure I remember what that means." "Then we'll start by defining it over breakfast," Julius said with a grin. "Coffee, bacon, a boat ticket home, pretty normal to me." Jane's eyes filled briefly and she turned to Mr. Carter. "I owe you an apology, sir. I think I can remember it all now." "Go on, Miss Finn," Carter said gently. She took a breath. "When the Lusitania was torpedoed, I was on deck. I remember the explosion, the noise, the chaos. Someone pushed me toward a lifeboat, but there was no room. I was thrown clear into the sea. I thought I would die." The room was utterly still. "But a man pulled me out. He said he was a friend of the government, that he could keep me safe. He called himself Brown." Her voice faltered. "He told me the papers I carried were dangerous, that he would guard them. I believed him." Tommy exchanged a grim glance with Tuppence. Jane continued, her voice steadier now. "After that, everything blurs. He took me to a house, gave me medicine, said it would help me sleep. When I woke, I was different, my memory gone. I remember fragments, voices, shadows, a woman singing somewhere. Later they told me I'd been found wandering, confused, near a railway station. They called it shock." "Hypnosis," Carter said quietly. "A crude but effective trick. He must have used it to erase your memory of the treaty's hiding place." Jane nodded. "And when I began to remember, even a little, they moved me again. The nursing home near the sea. Mr. Peel came to visit sometimes. I thought he was kind." Tuppence reached for her hand. "You couldn't have known." "No," Jane whispered, "but I should have seen the fear in his eyes. Kindness and fear don't live in the same face." There was a pause, heavy with things unsaid. Carter cleared his throat. "The important thing is you're safe now. The treaty will be secured. And as for Brown—" He hesitated, glancing toward the window where the rain-washed streets gleamed under sunlight. "Let us say the Empire owes you all more than it can publicly admit." Tommy grinned faintly. "We'll settle for tea and a quiet life." Tuppence raised an eyebrow. "Speak for yourself. I've rather enjoyed the adventure." He looked at her with mock horror. "You mean to say nearly being shot, poisoned and drowned appeals to you?" "Well," she said, smiling, "it's more exciting than shorthand." Julius chuckled. "If you two ever open another agency, let me know. I'll invest, provided there's a no-guns clause." Carter gathered his papers briskly. "If I hear the words young adventurers looted again, I'll have you both arrested." "Understood," Tommy said solemnly. "We'll call it something else next time." Carter gave them a look that might have been either admiration or exasperation. "Heaven help us all," he murmured. Later that afternoon, the four of them stood together at Tilbury Docks. The sea stretched out vast and glittering under the clear sky, gulls wheeling overhead, the air full of the smell of salt and coal smoke. The great liner's whistle sounded, deep, resonant, final. Jane turned to Tuppence, tears bright in her eyes. "I'll never forget what you've done for me." Tuppence squeezed her hand. "Just promise to write." "And to remember," Tommy added softly. "I will," Jane said. "Thanks to you, all of you, I can finally remember everything." Julius came forward, his suitcase in one hand, his other resting lightly on Jane's arm. "Time to go, cousin. America's waiting." Jane looked back once more. "Goodbye, Tuppence. Goodbye, Tommy." Tuppence smiled. "Goodbye, Jane. Take care of each other." They watched until the ship was only a white speck on the water, the sound of the whistle fading into distance. Tommy exhaled. "Well, partner, there goes our first case." Tuppence glanced sideways at him. "And quite possibly our last, if Mr. Carter has his way." He grinned. "Since when have you ever done what you're told?" She laughed softly. "A fair point." They walked back toward the car. The wind tugged at Tuppence's scarf, and the sun low over the Thames gilded her profile in gold. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "we may not have solved it like professionals, but we did rather well for a pair of amateurs." Tommy nodded. "Not bad at all. Still, next time. There'll be a next time, then?" He hesitated, then smiled. "Oh, I expect so. Somehow trouble seems to like our company." "Then we'll just have to make it pay," she said briskly. They reached the car and Tommy opened the door for her. "Back to London?" "Back to life," she said, settling in. "Whatever that means after all this." He started the engine. "I suppose it means tea at Leon's, a few quiet weeks, and waiting for the next fool who comes knocking with a mystery." She laughed, the sound bright against the hum of the motor. "Well, Mr. Beresford, when that happens, I dare say we'll answer." The car rolled away from the docks, leaving behind the glittering water and the echo of ship bells. Ahead lay London, restless, smoky, alive with possibility. And somewhere in the heart of it, two young adventurers were already dreaming of the next case. The fog of London had burned off by mid-morning, leaving Dover Street bright and full of that clean, golden light that only seemed to appear when the city had narrowly escaped disaster. It poured in through the second-floor windows of number 7, illuminating the modest office where two people who had lately been called everything from heroes to lunatics sat surrounded by a curious combination of flowers, newspapers, and unpaid bills. Tuppence Cowley, hat askew, skirt rumpled, spirits irrepressible, stood at the window polishing the brass sign with a handkerchief. The letters, slightly scuffed by the adventure they'd survived, gleamed once again. Young adventurers Ltd, willing to do anything, go anywhere. Behind her, Tommy Beresford sprawled in the battered office chair, reading aloud from the morning's paper with mock solemnity. "Amateurs foil spy chief," he declaimed. "Two unknowns expose international plot. Government silent, intelligence refuses comment." Well, that's accurate at least. The government's been refusing to comment to me for days. Tuppence turned, eyes bright. "We're famous, Tommy. Look at that, page 3. Not the society column, not even the back pages, real fame." He grinned. "Give it a week and they'll forget us. London's memory's about as long as a cab fare." "Then we'll simply have to give them something new to remember," she said briskly, setting the sign back into place. The door was propped open to the hall, letting in the hum of the city below, the distant clip of hooves, a motorcar horn, a newsboy shouting, "Peace secured! Mystery solved!" It felt, Tuppence thought, like the beginning of things rather than the end. "Do you realize," Tommy mused, folding the paper, "our first job nearly got us shot, drowned, chloroformed and hypnotized. We might have gone into insurance instead." She looked over her shoulder with mock sweetness. "We might also have starved by now. Adventure pays better, eventually." He chuckled. "I still can't believe Carter let us off without a public dressing down." "Oh," He'll scold us in private for years to come, she said airily. It's how he keeps from admitting he's impressed. The telephone on the desk gave a sharp, self-important ring. Tuppence pounced on it. Young Adventurers Limited. Miss Cowley speaking. There was a pause, then she stifled a laugh. No, madam, I'm afraid we don't locate lost cats. Not yet, anyway. But thank you for thinking of us. She hung up and grinned. Our first official inquiry, Tommy. We're back in business. Marvellous. A cat. Maybe we'll find a treaty next time it goes missing. He leaned back in the chair, watching her with that half-smile she was learning to recognize as dangerous. You're really reopening the firm? Of course. We've got stationery, a typewriter, and a reputation to ruin properly this time. Have we got clients? Soon. The papers will see to that. People love amateurs, especially successful ones. As if to prove her point, the post arrived moments later. The young delivery boy appeared in the doorway, cap in hand, arms full of envelopes. For you, miss, quite a pile. Tuppence took them eagerly. Thank you. Oh, look at these. Already more letters than we received in all our previous existence. Tommy rose, stretching. That's because last time we hadn't almost toppled an empire. Hand them here. They spread the envelopes across the desk, sorting through them like children with new toys. Some were ordinary business inquiries, lost items, suspicious neighbours, a missing will. Others were grander. Confidential matter concerning a fortune in jewels, private family trouble, discretion essential, inquiry about unusual circumstances in Kent. Tuppence's eyes gleamed. There's enough mystery here to keep us busy for years. Or dead by Easter, Tommy muttered, but there was affection behind the complaint. They worked through the pile together, laughing over the oddities, marking a few that seemed promising. At last, Tuppence leaned back in her chair and looked around the office. The worn rug, the crooked blinds, the faint smell of ink and dust. Somehow, it felt perfect. It's strange, she said softly. When we started all this, I only wanted excitement, something to shake the dullness out of life. I never thought we'd actually make a difference. You did, he said quietly. You just pretended not to. She smiled, caught by his tone. And you? Tommy shrugged. I thought I was just tagging along to make sure you didn't get into trouble. Shows what I knew. A moment of comfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the faint rattle of the city below. Tuppence rose, moved to the small kettle in the corner and poured 2 cups of tea. You know, Tommy, I've been thinking. That always frightens me. She handed him a cup. Adventure's a habit, isn't it? Once you've started, it's rather hard to give up. He blew on the tea and smiled. So is you. She laughed, a warm, startled sound that filled the little office. Oh, Tommy, that was nearly romantic. Be careful, or people will think we're engaged. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. Aren't we, in a way? Partners, at least. Partners, yes, she said softly. And perhaps someday the other thing. But for now, work. She moved to the typewriter, sliding a fresh sheet of paper into place. The keys gleamed invitingly, ready for new mischief. Tommy watched her fingers poised above the keys. What are you writing? Our first official announcement, she said. Properly worded this time. She began to type, the sound cheerful and steady in the quiet room. To whom it may concern, young adventurers limited are once again at your service. Discretion, initiative, and enthusiasm guaranteed. The carriage bell rang, crisp and final. Tuppence looked up, satisfied. There, that sounds respectable enough, don't you think? Tommy nodded. Almost too respectable. Perhaps you should add a line promising the occasional scandal. She grinned. I'll save that for the fine print. He moved to stand beside her, reading over her shoulder. Sunlight spilled across the desk, turning the typed words to gold. For a long moment, neither spoke. The room was alive with possibility. The hum of the city below, the soft breeze through the open window, and the quiet click of dreams being set into motion again. Finally, Tuppence reached for the stack of envelopes. Well, partner, she said, which case shall we solve first? Tommy smiled, his voice full of the contentment that follows chaos. Whichever one knocks loudest. She nodded, eyes bright. Then let's be ready. Outside, the clock struck noon. Somewhere a newsboy shouted headlines. Carriages rolled by, and the city moved on, busy, unknowing, alive. Inside the small office on Dover Street, two young adventurers sat surrounded by sunlight, laughter, and the faint promise of another mystery waiting just beyond the door. And as Tuppence's fingers danced once more across the keys, the rhythmic clatter of the typewriter filled the air, steady, bright, unstoppable, the unmistakable sound of beginnings.